Thank you. Thank you all so much for coming to celebrate Earth Day. Here, I think, is our real challenge. Buckminster Fuller, in many ways one of the fathers of sustainability, challenged us to be the architects of a future, of a world that works for 100% of humanity. Here's what we have today. And this is our opportunity to transform every aspect of how we live, how we conduct business, of human activity, so that we're doing business the way nature does business. And I'm truly honored to be here at a school that gets it, that has gotten an ASHE Silver ranking, that's in the top 30 of the Sierra Club's cool sustainability schools. This is a growing trend across the nation of schools joining the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education. And you guys have been one of the pioneers of implementing this stuff even before you had a sustainability office. Why? Because it was saving you money. Nothing wrong with that. That's the right answer. As a world, we have a lot of challenges. What scared me was in 2011 when both the International Energy Agency and the OECD, Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, IEA has always said, burn lots of oil. There's lots of oil in the world. Don't worry about it. Burn it. OECD has always said, grow, 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 grow the economy, no limits. In that year, they both came out and said, unless world leaders put in place climate protection measures by 2017, we will lock in 6°C warming. They said, sorry, it's too late. We've already locked in 2°C warming. Anybody know how much warming we've had so far? 0.8 degrees. So all of the impacts that we're already seeing of climate change, melting polar caps, violent weather, droughts, fires, floods, this is with 0.8°C. Double it, 1.6°C, and you're still not to the 2°C that is inevitable because of decisions we've already made, carbon we've already emitted, infrastructure that's already in place. All the coal plants China's built, all the coal plants that we continue to run, all the cars we all drive, the airplanes I fly around on. We've locked in 2°C. And the UN in 2012, in its Resilient People, Resilient Planet, A Future Worth Choosing, said by 2030, we're going to need 50% more food, 45% more energy, 30% more water. That last one has a little physics problem attached to it because the water we have on Earth is all the water we're ever going to have on Earth. We're not going to create more water. What we do need, they are saying, is to supply water to a growing population around the world. Over 1 billion people now do not have access to clean drinking water. And climate change. When Business Week, Bloomberg comes out and says, it's global warming, it's real. And indeed, the science is getting increasingly precise. If you go back 11,000 years, we have been in a period of relative cooling of late, until the last 100 years when it spiked upwards. And this is what we're getting, Superstorm Sandy, that flooded the New York subways. Here in North Carolina, you have had hurricanes. You're going to have more. Hurricanes have always been with us, so what we're getting is more and more violent storms. In the Midwest, the drought last year cut corn production and drove up food costs. This goes into every food item that we buy, that our restaurants buy. And indeed, this last year, with the drought in the Midwest, Tyson, the big chicken producer, spent $700 million more to buy corn to feed their chickens. Their profit averages between $600 and $800 million a year. They just lost their profit. If this goes on, their business model's at risk. And indeed, in the last couple of years, we've seen 2 spikes in world food prices. Now, it was a food riot in Tunisia that kicked off the Arab Spring. When you have a population across the Middle East, young, unemployed men, and now they're not eating, this is a recipe for unrest. And in 2008, we had the tortilla riots. The price of oil spiked. In March of 2008, oil was at historic heights. And so everybody said, oh, well, let's turn corn into ethanol. The only problem with that is corn is also what you use to make tortillas. World corn prices spiked. Price of tortillas went up 300%. And so you had hundreds of thousands of people in the part of the world, Latin America, that eats a lot of tortillas, rioting over it. Now, a lot of these issues are interconnected. Water. Goldman Sachs says water will be the petroleum of the 21st century. And worldwide, water use is doubling about every 21 years. 2/3 of the world's people live in areas that are short of water. So Royal Dutch Shell is now talking about the nexus of energy, food, and water security, because 70% of the water that we use gets used for agriculture. And as we know, water flows uphill to money. Farmers pay around 30 bucks an acre foot for water. Fracking companies are outbidding farmers and indeed now cities for water. What they do with it is mix it with a bunch of very nasty chemicals that they won't tell you what's in it, inject it into the ground to break apart the rock to let the gas flow, and then they get what's called flowback water that they then have to do something with. So what they do is turn around and inject it into deep wells. Now across the Midwest, Oklahoma, Colorado, they're creating earthquakes. Pennsylvania, Ohio. And now I hear fracking is coming to North Carolina. You might want to think a lot about this. It uses a lot of water. And if you are not scrupulous in regulating the fracking companies, you can actually light household water on fire in areas where the fracking companies have not been regulated. And I've seen this done on Divide Creek in Colorado. Put a little paper cone over a stream, just set it on the stream so it concentrates the air flowing off it, and you can light it. Fracking is now a national problem. This is western Colorado. And it's coming to a farm near you. There are a lot of good reasons. If you like eating, if you like having clean water, you may want to think very carefully about fracking. And there's another reason. The wells leak. What they leak is the natural gas. That is at least 22 times worse for the climate than CO2, the exhaust from a coal plant. Indeed, we're fracking, in theory, to get this clean natural gas that's not as dirty as coal, and yet if you count the leakages, fracking is probably just as dirty as coal. You add it all up, add up all of what we're doing to the Earth, and you get reports like Global Biodiversity Outlook 3 from Dr. Tom Lovejoy and a lot of scientists at the Smithsonian. We're losing every major ecosystem on the planet. 3 of them are tipping into collapse. Coral reefs, sorry scuba divers, business as usual, there will be no living coral reefs on planet Earth, perhaps as early as 2050. The Amazon, this is a bit more serious. This is the Earth's lungs. And then the oceans are acidifying. You pour all this carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, it goes somewhere. It, by and large, has been going into the oceans, as has a lot of the heat, which is why we have not warmed up even more than we have. And when you acidify the oceans, you make things like oyster farming uneconomic. The slight carbonic acid dissolves the shells of baby oysters. Well, we can all live without oysters, but the bigger problem is that it also dissolves the shells of these little critters called phytoplankton. They are not only the base of the oceanic food chain, they produce something like half the oxygen on Earth. Now, in a sense, why worry? This has happened at least 3 times before on planet Earth. Temperatures have soared, CO2 concentrations have gone up, oceans have acidified, 60 to 90% of life on Earth has gone extinct, and we're all still here, or we're here again. Life rebuilds. So as George Carlin says, save the Earth will be fine. It'll shake us off like a bad case of fleas. What we're talking about is save the humans. Save life as we know it. And I don't know about you, but I'm a little sentimental about this human experiment. What I'm talking about starts to sound a lot like that old book, Limits to Growth. This was the first time that the word sustainability was used in the English language, 1972. And it ran models, computer-based models of what would happen given a certain set of assumptions. And in the worst case models, we crash. And people have said, well, Limits to Growth was wrong. We're all still here. The Smithsonian last year was so unkind as to plot that old model and what has happened since 1972. 72 till about 2000, which is as far as they could get the data. Those are the dark lines. The lighter lines, the dashed lines, are the old model. We're kind of eerily right on track, aren't we? Meadows did not say we would crash before about 2030. How many of you plan to be around in 2030? We're right on track. And here are some of the reasons why this might be plausible. Lester Brown points out that if China continues to grow economically at the rate that it has, and probably has to some approximation to avoid revolution, and uses resources as efficiently as we do, they're now 4-fold less efficient, by 2030, China is going to want more oil than the world now lifts or can ever lift. And more cars, coal, cotton, concrete, copper. China's going to want it all. The future is not possible, business as usual. When you realize that the future is not possible, you're looking at what Royal Dutch Shell calls a driver of change. It's going to change. We may not yet know how, but we know it's not going to go on like this. Now, yes, absolutely. All of these numbers that I've been throwing out are projections of the future. And as the great physicist Niels Bohr said, predictions are risky, especially those about the future. Take, for example, the science on climate change. We argue over it. That's what science is. Here's the science I like. And I'm going to argue it doesn't matter. Now, I say that with all deference to the great climate scientists who are trying to make their models catch up to observed reality, because we're outrunning the models. The impacts are happening years before the models said they ought to. But let's assume that the skeptics are right. Climate change is a hoax. Don't go to Vegas on the odds of that being true. But if all you are is a profit-maximizing capitalist, you'll do exactly what you'd do if you were scared to death about climate change, because we know how to solve this problem at a profit. If it's a hoax, we'll make a lot of money. If it's real, we'll make a lot of money. Either way, let's go. We can argue over the science in the bar later on. And that's the thesis of the book, The Way Out. Kickstarting capitalism to save our economic ass. Because we now know that the companies that are bringing to market disruptive innovation around ways to emit less carbon, use less energy, are financially outperforming the companies that don't. And even in a country, ours, where there is no price on carbon, if you emit carbon, nobody charges you for it. In most of the rest of the world, they do. In the United States, no price on carbon. Even in this country, there are now 2 studies showing that the carbon emitters are valued less by the market than the companies that are finding ways to cut their carbon emissions. There's a group in the UK called the Carbon Disclosure Project. This is a group of young people who about 10 years ago started sending out to the largest companies on earth, the Financial Times 500, a little survey. What's your carbon footprint? As you might imagine, for the first few years, everybody ignored them. I mean, who died and made them God? Now, essentially every large company on the planet reports every year to the Carbon Disclosure Project what their carbon footprint is. Why? 2 good reasons. One, the kids are now backed by institutional investors, the big pension funds, with assets of $83 trillion. So if you're going to go to the capital marketplace as a company, you might want to answer the kids' questions. And for the other, Walmart has put out a sustainability scorecard. Question number 1, what's your carbon footprint? Question number 2, do you report to the Carbon Disclosure Project? Who died and made CDP God? The Walmart and the institutional investors. So what you're doing here, even as you're building out, decreasing your energy use, is just good business. There's a lot that you can do for free. Just changing your behavior can save 10% of your energy. Ohio State found this out. They published a little policy. Turn off your computer if you're not sitting in front of it. Saved the university $250,000 a year. They're putting that money into their academic programs. My team walked into a company, 6,300 computers and monitors that they left on 24/7 because of some urban myths. Shortens the life of the computer to turn it off and on. No. IT needs it left on 24/7. No. 1 night a week would do fine. In this company, just publishing a policy, turn the darn thing off if you're not sitting in front of it, would save them $700,000. This is free money. The economists amongst us will tell us this isn't possible. There is no such thing as free money. If these kinds of savings existed, they would have been captured. This is a real company. And nationally, we waste $2.8 billion every year buying and burning energy to run computers with nobody home. Ford Motor Company figured it out, published such a policy, saved themselves $1 million. You can do it at home. You can do it in a small business. Well, it's beer money. These kinds of programs that Elaine and Jessica and the student interns in the sustainability department are running are making this campus a more cost-effective place to get a degree. And it's not just here on campus. The Greensboro Coliseum, 25% cut in their energy use, 50% cut in water use. I haven't noticed them going out of business. In Research Triangle, cutting annual operating expenses by $1 million. The lighting is now 70% more efficient. Even if you have done a lighting retrofit, as you guys have here on campus, to go to the compact fluorescents, it's now worth coming back and going to LEDs. And in the high-end hotels and restaurants, you're starting to see LEDs popping up because they give you a much more precise light. When you save energy in a community, per megawatt saved, you generate over $2 million in increased economic activity, over $500,000 in increased wages and jobs. So colleges around the country are getting into this. Butte College generates more electricity through its solar array than the college uses, earns themselves 50 to 75 million. And I guess it had been hoped that when I came, you guys would have a solar farm. You will. It's now being worked on, and it's a very cost-effective thing to do. Renewables are winning the world around. Here in this country, we added a gigawatt. A gigawatt is roughly a nuclear-sized chunk of electricity, almost 2 gigawatts in 2011. That's up twofold from 2010. 3.3 gigawatts in 2012, 76% growth in solar, and prices fell by almost a third. They've fallen almost 3/4 in the last couple of years. Projecting over 4 gigawatts next year. How much new nuclear did we bring on? Here in North Carolina, Apple's solar farm took them less than 2 years. You can bring this stuff on very rapidly. Wind, second fastest growing energy supply around the world. In the last couple of years, we have brought on more new wind than the entire nuclear capacity of Japan. And I've never heard anybody call for an evacuation plan from a wind farm. Wind spills, that's a bad one. 35% of new US electric generating capacity came from wind, 2007 to 2011. At Stanford, a man named Mark Jacobson has shown that the country, and indeed the world, can meet its entire need for energy through renewable energy by 2035. It would be cheaper to do it this way, and it generates a great deal more jobs. We have traditionally thought of the grid. Duke thinks of the grid as big central chunks of electricity which they send out to y'all and charge you. That's not the future. Sorry, Jim Rogers, or Jim's successor. That's not the future. The future is going to be distributed generation with the utility mediating between all of these distributed sources and perhaps providing a little backup. Coal. This part of the country, well, Kentucky, West Virginia, thinks of itself as coal country. Harvard reckons that the life cycle cost of coal exceeds the benefits significantly, and now recent studies in both Kentucky and West Virginia have found the same thing. The costs of digging this stuff up exceed the economic benefit to the state of doing so. And I keep mentioning jobs. Check out the clean economy. Clean tech sector is outperforming the rest of the economy. In California, the clean economy grew 3 times as fast as the traditional economy, and 1/4 of the new jobs are in manufacturing. compared to 6 to 9% in the rest of the economy. Occam Steiner, director of the UN Environment Program, reckons that a global clean economy would create 15 to 60 million jobs worthwhile over the next couple decades. How do you do it? How do you get jobs in your community? There are two policies that can help. One is called PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy. It was done first in Berkeley, California, then rolled out on a bigger scale in Sonoma. In the teeth of the '08 recession, in the first 9 months of 2009, what it is the county put together a pool of money. Anybody can come and borrow the money and put solar, put energy efficiency onto their buildings. And you pay it back out of a slight increase to the property tax of the affected property. So if I put solar on my place, I pay a slightly higher property tax. If you don't pay any higher. This is not a tax increase across the board. I know Americans hate taxes. But this is choosing to pay it back attached to the property. This is not a personal loan to me. If I move, the loan stays with the property. In the first 9 months of 2009, construction trades went up 8.4%. In neighboring Napa that did not have this program, jobs went down 3%. Oh, and then those paragons of financial rectitude, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, both of them bankrupt, squashed PACE financing. They said, we will redline any jurisdiction that implements PACE financing. We don't want anybody standing in line ahead of us to get access to your mortgage money. And so the program died across the country. In some areas, it's being resurrected for commercial real estate. In Sonoma, they said, the heck with Fannie and Freddie, we're going ahead with the program. It's creating jobs. And so they have done. Well, okay, if we can't use PACE across the country, what else works? Why is it that California gets 70% more sunlight than cold, cloudy Germany? But in the past couple of years, Germany's been installing 28 times the amount of solar as goes in California. No, Rush Limbaugh, it's not because Germany has more sunlight. It's because Germany has good policy. They put in place a program called a feed-in tariff. What this is the national government said to the utilities, you guys will pay a fair price for green electricity. The program created over 480,000 new jobs. Why is Germany now economically prosperous, in a position to bail out the south of Europe? Because they're manufacturing, because they're building the clean energy economy. Germany reckons to be 100% renewably powered by 2050. They're going to be 50% renewably powered within a couple of years. And they have cut the cost of solar by getting the volumes up. They've cut the cost of solar to the point where it'll be competitive with grid electricity this year. Oh, you say, if you pay more for green electricity, it's going to raise everybody's rates. Yes, that's true. Deutsche Bank did a study. It costs more, 2 to 3 euro per month more to have this program across all of Germany. $50 a year. In total, 8.6 billion euro more per year. Ooh, sounds like a lot. What Deutsche Bank found was if they had done nothing, if they had just continued to burn coal, they would have paid 9.4 billion euro more. So sorry, you're going to pay more. You're going to pay less more if you have good policy than if you don't. Got that? I know, it's a little hard to wrap your head around. What you have in Germany is now towns that are 100% renewably powered. Wilpolsried is more than 100% renewably powered, so like Butte College, they're earning money for their community. We now have nearly 100 gigawatts of solar worldwide. And check it out, this is called a solar tree. You park your car in the shade and charge your electric car from the sun while you're shopping or at work. There are other ways of fueling a car. In Scotland, Scotland reckons to be 100% renewably powered by 2020. They're making fuel from the leftovers of making whiskey. And there's an interesting story. I was touring Scotland, and some people said, do you want to tour a sustainable whiskey distillery? It's like, oh, yeah. So we're going around. The engineer said, don't tell the company, but I would pay them to work here. He said, the CEO said, make it green. It said, if you can do it, have it pay back in 10 years. But if you can't, go ahead and make it green. I said, who's the company? He said, Diageo. They own 40% of the world's spirits market. I went home and bought stock in Diageo. It's been my single best performing stock. Why? Because the management gets it. And in the last 2 years ago, Diageo North America, the management said, what would it cost us to go 100% carbon neutral? Emit no carbon on net. So they ran some numbers and they said, oh, a lot. So the management said, well, let's go 50%. We don't know how, go figure it out. And what they found was they could get 50%. They got it in less than 2 years through no-cost, low-cost measures that are now saving the company lots of money. Then a guy at Diageo up in Canada came and said, I have this opportunity to use methane from landfills and can make this whole operation entirely renewably powered, but it's going to cost more money than the corporate payback rate. That word of that trickled up to the North American management, and they called the guy up and they said, do it, do it. We have so much savings from our efficiency programs, it will pay for the cost of that, and now Diageo has gone 80% carbon neutral in 2 years' time. When you start changing these energy supply systems, you have opportunities for very cool cars. Or different transit modes. We used to be able to go from Boston to St. Louis on trolley cars in this country at an average speed exceeding what you can now do on our interstate highway system. In Amsterdam and Copenhagen, tens of thousands of people commute every day by bicycle. In Copenhagen, it's half the population. High-speed rail. China has 30,000 kilometers of route of high-speed rail under construction. How many do we have in this country? 0. We need to rethink how we build our cities. This is a poster that was in the Munich City Planning Office. Same number of people transported by cars, it fills up the whole road, by one bus, or by bicycles. How do we design our towns? Around cars. When we start redesigning, we have the opportunity to do buildings differently. Harvard Business Review now reckons that owners of standard building portfolios face obsolescence and are greening their portfolios, coming back and retrofitting the older buildings, and when they build new buildings, building them green. Why? Because it saves money. An average green building, 30% more energy efficient, add that up over, say, 100,000 square feet, it's real money. You can lease a green building faster and for a higher rate. So, surprise, the value of green buildings has been going up every year. It's now projected by 2015, 60% of new building starts will be green buildings. This is the new Bullitt Center in Seattle that is a living building. The entire roof is solar panels. In Seattle. If they're doing it in Seattle, trust me, you can do it in North Carolina. Guess what? You are. LEED platinum buildings, LEED silver buildings. And you have a higher quality of life when you're inside these buildings. Here in North Carolina, green building is sweeping the retrofit market and creating jobs. And we're not anywhere near the edge of the envelope. BEDZ in the UK. Z means zero energy district. This is a whole community, net zero. And a much higher quality of life. Everybody who lives here has a garden. They designed it around a transit plan, so you don't need to own a car if you live there. What I'm talking about is not polar bears. Polar bears will eat you. This is how do we deliver a higher quality of life to all of us. And it's not a red or a blue issue. My friend Jim Woolsey used to run the CIA. You kind of got to worry about yourself when you have a friend who's running the CIA. Jim drives a plug-in hybrid car that he fuels off the solar panels on his roof. He had a bumper sticker on the back, "Osama bin Laden hates my car." He sees this as a national security issue. And I think he's right. So does Ray Mabus, Secretary of the Navy, who has said that this is about enhanced security. Ray has called for the Great Green Fleet to have the Navy be half renewably powered by 2020. Why? He says, look, we need an American-made, homegrown fuel that is stably priced, competitive with oil. So they are already flying choppers, running frigates. The F-18 Green Hornet flies on half biofuel, half petroleum. And we have Army bases like the Fort Carson military base, Mountain Post, that is going to be net zero. Zero energy, zero water that has to be imported, zero waste by 2020. How are they doing it? Companies like Solazyme, a young entrepreneur named Jonathan Wolfson, who is making energy out of pond scum. And it's his algae biofuel that is what the Navy is using to run its vehicles around on. I hope you realize there is no silver bullet, but there's an awful lot of silver buckshot. If you add together all of the technologies, we can solve the climate crisis, and we can do so at a profit. We can solve all of the environmental problems facing us and do so at a profit. And it's happening. Whether it be Harvard Business Review reports or sustainability certifications, or my friend Yvonne Chenard of Patagonia getting the cover of Fortune magazine, or Walmart going green. If you had told me 5, 10 years ago that the two entities on the planet doing the most to drive sustainability would be the US military and Walmart, I'd have offered to eat my hat. But here we are. Now, trust me, Walmart's not doing this out of the goodness of their hearts. They're doing this because last year they saved $1 billion. And indeed, there are now 45 separate studies. You can download this study of studies. This profiles 40 of them. 5 more have come out since we wrote it. You can download this from my website that I'll put up at the end. You can get it for free. Sustainability Pays. Studies from the likes of those wild-eyed environmentalists at Goldman Sachs, showing that the companies that are the leaders in environment, social, and good governance policy have 25% higher stock value than their less sustainable competitors. When Goldman Sachs tells you sustainability is good business, there's a business case. Harvard, sustainability is not the burden on the bottom line, it is the touchstone of all of innovation. And in the future, only companies that have it as a goal will achieve competitive advantage. Why? Why is this true? The short answer is we don't entirely know. I believe there are at least 13 reasons. You may have heard the phrase, the triple bottom line. I actually think that's an intellectual dead end, and I've had this conversation with the man who created that phrase, a guy named John Elkington out of the UK. Because what people have done is say, okay, triple bottom line. I'm a business person. Okay, I'll take my bottom line, and then if I have to, I will bolt onto it programs to protect people and programs to protect the environment. They're cost centers. This is a tough sell to business. I think what we ought to be talking about is what we call the integrated bottom line. Because if you're in business, there's one bottom line. But if these 45 studies are showing that the more sustainable companies are more profitable, that's the bottom line. So why? If you use less energy, water, materials, resources, your costs come down. This will eventually show up in your bottom line, but you may not know why. Ability to drive innovation, like Diageo, when they said, okay, we're going to go 50% of the way to carbon neutral. Go figure it out. It drove their corporate innovation. Reducing risk. If you have toxics in your operations and your workers are at risk of getting sick, if you're emitting carbon, check it out. When we were sitting at supper, I just got a report that the amount of the US stock market, the total value of the US stock market is at risk because of the assumption that companies that own fossil fuels will be allowed to dig them up and burn them. It's called the carbon bubble. Go home and Google it. Very interesting article. This is an unbooked liability of these companies. The ability to attract and retain the best talent. Young people want to work for sustainable companies. Once you have these people, you put them in good green buildings, you engage your workforce in implementing sustainability, you get 16% higher profitability, 18% higher labor productivity. Put people in good green buildings, you get 6 to 16% higher labor productivity. Market share, brand equity. Coke puts its brand on its balance sheet for $80 billion. And Coke is now at risk because what is a Coke? What's a Coca-Cola? What's it made of? Actually, it's not sugar. It's high fructose corn syrup and water and a little bit of phosphoric acid and some flavoring at a time at which Americans are worried about obesity. So Coke is now, again, today's news. Soft drink sales in the US declined last year, both Coke and Pepsi. What increased is their sales of water. They are redefining themselves as companies around hydration. So Coke owns what? Minute Maid. Pepsi owns a whole set of juice companies. Market share. Managing your supply chain. Walmart has 100,000 suppliers. And as of this year, Walmart buyers are going to be personally incentivized. Their bonuses are going to be tied to key performance indicators, KPIs around, are they using the Walmart sustainability scorecard to decide whether they're going to buy from you or from you. If you're more sustainable, they need to buy from the more sustainable company. Why is Walmart doing this? They are reducing the cost of distrust. Walmart was one of the most hated brands in the US, And since they announced their sustainability initiatives, they've cut in half the number of people who don't like them. The companies that get it right will be first to the future. We're talking about the billionaires of tomorrow, because think about it. Go back to the first industrial revolution when we invented commerce using water power to make iron and textiles. And then steam engines, James Watt, locomotives. Where did that happen? Where did the first industrial revolution happen? Not here in the US. England, Charles Dickens. And what was happening geopolitically at the time? The British Navy ruled the waves. The sun never set on the British Empire. This little island off the coast of Europe ruled the world. Why? Because they innovated. And then, whoa, back up one. Come on, back up. Henry Ford built a car. Some fool found oil in Pennsylvania, and Henry Ford built a car. And Thomas Edison built a light bulb in General Electric. And power started to shift across the Atlantic until by the time World War II rolled around, the industrial might of Detroit was able to pivot in 90 days from making cars to making tanks and airplanes. The US entered the war, we won it, and this has been the American century. And then we moved on to the IT revolution, gave us all these things in our pockets with 3,000 songs on them. I really didn't know I needed one until I couldn't live without it. What's next? What will you all do for jobs? What is the next wave of innovation? I think it's the green revolution. It's sustainability, it's biomimicry, it's green chemistry, it's lean manufacturing. These are the products and the services and the technologies that the world is crying out for. And the companies that are the leaders into it are going to be the ones that profit. Young people want to work for clean companies. Johnson Controls found 96% of the millennials want to work for a responsible company. They also want to come to a school that is badging itself as around sustainability, which is why curriculum is changing around the country, actually around the world, introducing new programs around sustainability. Now, everything I've been saying so far is the business case. But my friend Ray Anderson, who was CEO of Interface Carpets, put it rather simply. He said, what's the business case for ending life on Earth? He introduced what he called Mission Zero. Zero footprint, zero impact. Interface is half the way there. He wanted to hit it by 2020. They're half the way there. Greenhouse gas emissions down, fossil fuel use down, water use down, use of renewables up, recycling up. Sales up by 2/3 and profits doubled. Ray tragically died 2 years ago this summer. And I was asked, who's the next Ray Anderson? And I said, Paul Pullman. Who? Pullman is the CEO of a little startup company called Unilever, global brand. In 2011, he did a very courageous thing. He said, I'm not going to report quarterly. He's not going to give his quarterly financials to Wall Street. He said, this short-term fixation by Wall Street traders is driving corporate managers to do the wrong thing for the earth and for their companies. His stock dropped 10%. He said, I respect those of you who have sold as human beings, but if you believe that my managing your company holdings in the casino of Wall Street, where the traders make money if the stock goes up, the traders make money if the stock goes down. Why did Apple stock, one of the most profitable companies in history, why did Apple stock drop last week? Because the traders make money if it goes down, and they will make money when it comes back up. This fixation on short-term profits drives companies. When the quarter is coming up, how do you get your costs down? You fire people. And so we have in this country now something like 25 million people out of work because of games like the Wall Street casino. Pullman also announced the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan. Cut his environmental impact in half by 2020, not as ambitious as Ray, but he's starting later. Source everything, all his feedstocks that come from something grown from sustainable agriculture, and lift 1 billion people out of poverty. And since that time, his stock has gone up 17%, and his profits have doubled. Go, Paul! And so about 3 weeks ago, Unilever asked if I would join their North American Advisory Board, and I said I would be deeply honored. Here is a company that is leading the way into the future. Because the time is very short. Remember those IEA numbers? I like the Sidney Harris cartoon. The two old boys scribbling equations on a blackboard, and in the middle it says, then a miracle occurs, and then the one old boy says to the other, I think you need to be a little more explicit here in step 2. Yeah, we need a miracle. Here's why. Bill McKibben, Humboldt College professor, had an article in Rolling Stone last summer in which he laid out the math. The fossil fuel companies own 2,795 gigatons of carbon that's still in the ground, oil, gas, coal. The Earth can withstand the emission of 565 more gigatons. The business model of the fossil fuel industry is to dig it up and burn it. If they do, we roast. If they do, we lose. The earth will go on. Life as we know it will not. So who's responsible? Who's going to deal with this? I like this picture out of New Zealand where the guy's just painted right over a dead possum. Government's not going to do it. We've seen. This poster was in the Copenhagen airport in 2009 when the world's leaders came together to put in place a global deal on reducing carbon and failed. What are we going to tell our grandchildren? We know today what we have to do. Who's going to do it? My vote is the entrepreneurs. And people like Janine Benyus. Janine's an Humboldt science writer who wrote this book, Biomimicry. I highly recommend it to you. She asked the simple question, how does nature do business? Because nature makes a wide array of products and services very differently than we do. Nature doesn't run on big flows of fossil energy, it runs on sunlight. Nature doesn't have persistent toxins. They're very dangerous things. You ever been in the proximity of a rattlesnake or a black widow spider? But the poison doesn't hang around for hundreds of thousands of years like nuclear waste. Nature makes everything near to something that's alive at room temperature with no waste. The output of any process in nature is food for some other. And nature shops locally. In nature, carbon is not the world's greatest poison. It's the building block of all of life. So how do we transform our industry to do business the way that nature does? And again, I think it's going to be the entrepreneurs. I'm a mentor to an organization called the Unreasonable Institute that every year brings together young entrepreneurs from around the world. And I've just been mentoring a couple of young men from India who have a proprietary process to take carbon exhaust and turn it into carbon nanotubes. Carbon nanotubes are very useful, very high value, because the only way we've known how to make them heretofore is very expensive. This process will make them much more cheaply, and it'll suck up carbon. Company out in California called Calera, they said, what in nature soaks up carbon? They said coral reefs. Coral reefs are essentially limestone, calcium carbonate. How do they do it? So they take the flue gas of a natural gas plant and mist seawater through this gas, and what falls out is cement. Well, they can't call it cement because the cement industry says it's not cement. Cement is where you dig up old limestone and you bake it at very high temperatures. By the way, that releases a lot of carbon. So they're calling it something else, but they're sucking carbon out of the atmosphere. Jeff Coates up at Cornell is making plastic out of carbon. This, I think, is the great frontier. How do we build companies that suck carbon out of the air and do it profitably? Maimonides said, every one of us must see ourselves as though the entire world is held in balance, and any deed we do could tip the scales. So I'm going to leave you with one thought. What's your dot? Every one of you, when you leave here tonight, what are you going to do that's a little bit different? Do one thing. Thank you very much. Happy Earth Day.